Well, John, here we are. First episode of the Infinite Chapter. Are you nervous?
Honestly, a little. It's exciting, isn't it? To feel that we're starting something that can accompany people in their reading, in their coffee moment. And speaking of coffee, I'm sure you're surprised I chose a cafe as our first recording spot.
Totally. It's not the most common choice. Why here?
For many years, cafes were my refuge. Places where I could read, feel accompanied without being with anyone in particular, and at the same time stay focused. I could spend hours listening to the clinking of cups, the sound of pages turning, and feel that I wasn't alone. The chatter around me was like white noise, almost like a musical backdrop that allowed me to enter the world of the books more deeply. It seemed perfect to start here, because this podcast aims to be that, a shared literary refuge. An intimate space, but open to the world.
A beautiful beginning. And honestly, I like that idea of literature being better lived in company. In fact, I think it makes a lot of sense to sit here talking about stories while surrounded by people living their own. So let's dive in. Today we're talking about Musashi, right?
Exactly. The author is Eiji Yoshikawa, born in 1892 and died in 1962. He came from a humble family near Tokyo. He worked hard from a young age, but carried a huge passion for literature. He began as an apprentice in crafts, then became a journalist, and finally, a serialized novelist. His style was sharp in the newspapers, where immediacy demanded keeping readers hooked. Imagine this: daily chapters devoured by thousands of people, waiting for the next installment with the same anticipation we now feel for the release of a streaming series. People discussed them in tea houses, in trains, even in schools, almost like the collective ritual of following a soap opera.
That explains the almost cinematic rhythm you feel in the novel.
Exactly. And his decision to choose Musashi wasn't random either. Japan was going through turbulent times, the rise of militarism, nationalism boiling, the need for figures who embodied cultural pride. Musashi, a legendary swordsman, was perfect as a hero who represented discipline, strength, and indomitable spirit. Yoshikawa published the saga between 1935 and 1939 in the Asahi Shimbun. But beyond narrating the feats of a swordsman, he wanted to transmit the idea that true self-mastery is interior, and that even the greatest warrior had to learn to master his own heart. This was a message aimed at readers who were themselves navigating a rapidly changing world.
So it was both a historical account and a moral mirror.
Exactly. A narrative designed to inspire and educate, as well as entertain. And because of that, it became both literature and cultural compass.
For those who haven't read it, how would you summarize the plot?
The novel isn't a strict biography, but rather a blend of historical facts and a lot of imagination. We follow Takeso, a wild, impulsive, violent young man who, after various experiences, including the defeat at the Battle of Sekigahara, begins a process of transformation. Little by little, he becomes Miyamoto Musashi, a symbol of self-mastery and spiritual pursuit. The journey is both physical and internal. He travels from village to village, fights formidable rivals, but above all, he battles his inner demons: pride, blind ambition, the temptation of power. The countryside and landscapes of Japan are as much characters in the novel as the people he meets, reflecting his changing state of mind.
So he's not only fighting with the sword, but with his own soul.
Exactly. And along the way, we meet endearing and complex characters. Otsu, the woman who represents both love and renunciation. Matahachi, his cowardly, inconsistent counterpart. And a series of adversaries who, more than enemies, are unintended teachers. Every duel becomes a metaphor, every failure a stepping stone. All of this makes the novel a Japanese-style Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story showing how someone forges themselves through pain, discipline, and introspection. And the fact that Musashi constantly questions himself makes him far more human than the myth might suggest.
That explains why the story feels so universal. We all fight against our own inner Makahachis, don't we?
Yes, exactly. That friend who stays behind on the path, or that reflection of what we might become if we don't work on ourselves. The novel invites us to reflect on who we are when stripped of excuses.
What makes Yoshikawa's way of telling it so special?
Several things. First, the serialized structure. Each chapter had to hook the reader and leave them wanting more. He mastered the cliffhanger before the term was even popular. Second, the combination of epic and spirituality. There are spectacular duels, but also long silences in which Musashi contemplates the river or reflects under a tree. That alternation between action and contemplation is brilliant because it mirrors life, moments of frenzy balanced by moments of stillness. Third, the secondary characters, Otsu and Matahachi, but also Kojiro Sasaki, the legendary rival, function as mirrors and catalysts. And then there are side plots that enrich the main arc, giving the narrative a sense of vastness. The sword in the novel is not just a weapon, it's a symbol of character. Every battle is a life lesson.
And in terms of style, would you say it still holds up today?
Absolutely, because the essential point is not the historical data, but the central question: how do I become a better version of myself? That search, told with simplicity and emotion, connects with a reader in 1935 just as much with one today. That's why the book transcends its time and remains relevant.
I love anecdotes. Give me a few.
The publication was a cultural phenomenon. People eagerly waited each installment, to the point of reading it out loud in cafes or offices. In the newspaper's own newsroom, it's said that chapters were read out loud to the staff, like a little show. Imagine entire workplaces stopping their tasks just to hear the next turn in Musashi's journey. Yoshikawa, on the other hand, wasn't a martial arts expert, but he did extensive research in historical treatises, chronicles, and Musashi's own book of Five Rings. He admitted he wasn't seeking absolute fidelity, but wanted to convey the idea that the true battle was internal. And almost immediately, the work inspired theatrical adaptations, popular illustrations, and soon after films. The literary Musashi transformed into a popular icon at lightning speed.
So it was like a seed that sprouted across all the arts.
Exactly, a genuine transmedia phenomenon avant la lettre. Even decades later, manga authors like Takehiko Inoue would return to the novel to reinterpret it in a contemporary key. That adaptability proved the narrative power of Yoshikawa. Musashi became part of popular imagination, not just history.
What did it mean for Japan?
It was enormous. The novel solidified Musashi as a national myth. Hiroshi Inagi's film trilogy, starring Toshiro Mifune, is a direct heir to Yoshikawa's epic tone and even won an Oscar. Then came kabuki plays, TV adaptations, and manga that reimagined the figure. But most importantly, on a social level, it gave the Japanese people a resilient hero in times of crisis. A man who fell and rose again, who learned from his mistakes, who found greatness in self-control. For a society shaken by war and modernization, Musashi offered a path that was both traditional and inspiring.
So it wasn't just entertainment.
No, it was a mirror of collective resilience. For a Japan facing cultural shifts, wars, and reconstructions, Musashi was a reminder that the greatest strength doesn't lie in defeating the external enemy, but in mastering oneself. And even outside Japan, the novel has inspired readers, scholars, and martial artists alike.
And that message, is it still valid today?
Absolutely. In times of global uncertainty, reading Musashi can be almost therapeutic. His journey reminds us that stability begins within.
And now tell me, John, beyond the academic, what does Musashi mean to you?
For me, it's a vital metaphor. Every time I return to the novel, I discover something new. A symbolic detail, a lesson I had previously overlooked. Musashi reminds me that life is a constant training ground, that the important thing isn't defeating another, but mastering oneself. Learning to wait, to observe, to endure. Reading it at different stages of my life has shown me how the book grows with you. In my 20s, I was inspired by the action. In my 30s, I was moved by the discipline. and now I'm struck by the serenity it conveys. The novel almost functions as a mirror, reflecting back the questions you bring to it.
That's the beauty of great works, isn't it? They grow with you.
Exactly. And that's why I consider it one of the great universal epics, comparable to Greek classics or the great Western sagas. Yoshikawa created a hero who transcends the local and becomes a human archetype. Musashi is both particular and universal, both warrior and philosopher.
I think with this, we close a beautiful first episode. We've talked about the author, the context, the story, the curiosities, and its impact. And I admit, I now feel like rereading the saga, but also seeing it with new eyes.
That's the best effect this podcast can have. To reread, rediscover, or dare to read for the first time. And above all, to let each page confront us with our own discipline and our own doubts. If listeners take anything away, I hope it's the idea that literature isn't distant. It's a dialogue with ourselves.
So, to those listening, thank you for joining us in this beginning of the Infinite chapter. If you enjoyed it, share the episode, recommend it to your friends, and of course, read Musashi. You won't regret it.
See you on the next page. Until then, good path, good reading, and why not a good coffee?
And may that coffee, like the novel, be savored slowly, sip by sip. May it remind you that every pause, like every chapter, carries a lesson of its own.